Death Stranding has to be up there as one of the most divisive, polarising games we've seen in recent times. It's up there with The Last of Us Part 2 in that regards, and with the latest news that's come out of the Summer Game Fest being that Rockstar developer Hideo Kojima has been working on a director's cut of Death Stranding for the PS5, I can imagine this news has been received differently across the world.
Ladies and gentlemen, Death Stranding is coming to the PS5.
This station does not endorse vigilante justice, unless it gets results, which it will.
Originally released in November 2019, the reviews were met with similar, varying reactions.
It's clear that it's Kojima who's the one who's taking the piss.
And it is honestly one of the best I've ever played.
It is a complete and utter embarrassment.
I do think this game is one hell of an achievement in its own right.
It's a boring pile of shit.
Now, this isn't really a review of the reviewers because I've got a huge amount of respect for each one you heard there in their own rights, with Death Stranding effectively getting its third chance in the limelight after the original PS4 release, then being ported over to PC, and now the director's cut on PS5. I'm still so curious as to why was this game so divisive. There are, however, certain people's opinions that mean absolutely nothing to me. The tunnel vision type, the black and white deciders who will not be swayed. I respect their choice, but I don't respect their opinions, and there's a subtle difference. A painting is sometimes already a masterpiece before we even glance at it, purely because we know who painted it. Some artists could genuinely paint an absolute stinker, and of course there'd be some critics out there who'd wax lyrical about the emotional provocative explosions of colour, and the piece just speaks to their soul. But to me, the painting that's on your screen right now is pure fucking crap, and it needs recycling so an actually talented artist could make good use of that waste of paper. Well, that's what I told my son anyway when he showed it me. This simplistic mentality that something is already good because of the clothes label, the artist, the chef, or in this case, the games developer, is so shockingly flawed that it brings into question the legitimacy and credibility of any reviewer. Only they themselves will know whether their opinion is truthful to themselves and their viewers, so it's almost impossible to level the accusation of fanboy towards anybody. That is, until an obvious pattern of repetition appears where absolutely nothing whatsoever can sway their opinion to think differently or objectively about that particular game, or at the bare minimum they at least try to look through the eyes of another person to see why people have a different opinion compared to theirs. Just to be clear, I'm a huge fan of Death Stranding, and I've been a big fan of Kojima's past work too, but I'm not afraid to call a shit, just ask my son. But once I'd unravelled the borderline insane concept that's embedded deep within Death Stranding, trying to fathom what the actual fuck is going on inside Hideo Kojima's head, there was this light bulb moment when it all just sank in, and I sat back and wanted to tell him.
That, my friend, is some damn fine, genuine, outside-the-box thinking.
We all have favourite things in life, but most of us are in a privileged enough position to try something different once in a while. We've all probably got some DVDs and games nicely stacked on a shelving unit in our home, and at some point have stared at them knowing you want to watch or play something. But which one? You inevitably narrow it down to a few favourites to scratch that itch of wanting something, but not knowing what it is that you want. But what about those classics that haven't made the cut for this very moment of choosing? To put it simply, you just don't feel like watching that movie or playing that game. It's not a bad game, you just don't feel like playing a first-person shooter right now. That's totally fine. There's two things I wanted to mention on this vein of thought, and one is from the point of any reviewer. Sometimes it's the responsibility of the reviewer to review a game that if they had the choice, they would rather be playing something else right now. The game could still be considered a good game, but it's not so easy to get passionate about the game, whether that's a passionate hatred or a passionate love for the game, or even somewhere in between. But you have to approach the review through the eyes of the masses, while also balancing the truth of your own opinion. Why do I like this, and why would someone else not like it, or vice versa? The second thing I wanted to mention on the subject of in-the-moment feelings is how sometimes just biting the bullet and launching a game and playing it regardless, it can often just confirm your initial feelings in that moment and you barely get 10 minutes in before you just want to turn it off. But sometimes the game can sway your initial feelings towards enjoying it again and steal hours of your life before you even realise that itch has been well and truly scratched. This feeling usually stems from craving something new, something different, and I believe Death Stranding is the perfect game for those moments. When we crave something out of the ordinary, something that hasn't conformed to the mindless conveyor belt mass-produced same old, I often fall into that loop myself because a lot of the rinse and repeat genres out there are genuinely fun to play, but there will always come a time when even the longest lasting trend of gaming that is seemingly destined to live on forever will live its last day and the masses will eventually want something new. I understand why Death Stranding was rejected by a huge amount of people. The masses haven't finished enjoying what their genetically programmed brains have decided that they enjoy. There's nothing wrong with that. It could possibly take a game like Death Stranding 10 years before some people decide to at least recognize what Hideo Kojima was attempting in developing this game. Nobody knew what to expect. We've never seen a so-called Strand game before. Hideo Kojima didn't exactly do himself any favors though in attacking the gamers who didn't either understand it or simply just didn't enjoy his product, stating, maybe this is a game that is difficult to understand for a certain type of critic or audience. Americans are big fans of first-person shooters and Death Stranding is not. It is flying higher. Right, well come on man, that's not doing you any favours, and I think even the Kojima fanboys will have read that and been like... The man has unquestionably large testicles to even attempt what he's attempted with Death Stranding, and in my opinion, he's pulled it off. Einstein once said, the person who follows the crowd will usually go no further than the crowd. The person who walks alone is likely to find himself in places no one has ever seen before. That's amazing and an approach to life that Kojima obviously takes on board. But as much as I love the guy, you've got to be careful not to alienate people because there's a fine line between confidence and arrogance. The funniest thing I saw on its release was this massive uprising. This huge outcry was heard from actual delivery men. FedEx and UPS drivers across the globe felt betrayed because Death Stranding was simplified down to being a postman simulator. The same goes for anyone whose occupation would carry over into their spare time. An antique dealer probably has a house full of antiques. Do game developers not play their own games or play games at all? Why do football players jump on Twitch after a training session to play FIFA? And the most obvious one, of course, is the life of a hat salesman.
When you're outside the workplace, do you wear hats, or does that just kind of make you feel like you're always in the office?
It's a ridiculous argument to simplify Death Stranding so drastically, especially without playing it. I'm sure you've already noticed that I'm a big fan of Death Stranding, but that's not to say it's not got its flaws. The action side of the game, far and away the weakest aspect of the game. CQC is a term I learned from my time playing Metal Gear Solid back in the day, which is close quarters combat for those who aren't already aware, and in Death Stranding, the CQC is poor. You can wipe an entire camp of enemies out by simply mashing the punch button. Stealth is another viable tactic of approach, but sadly it's another boring one. The simple slow crouched approach from behind before strapping them up with your strand rope is half of the stealth mechanics, and the other half is hiding in the bushes so long as you've not stacked too much cargo on Sam's back. For me, this is far and away the weakest part of Death Stranding, and for Kojima to have included a reasonable amount in the game, I was surprised at how poorly refined this CQC and stealth elements were. This is probably where my negativity ends though, because sticking with the combat still, the weapons are satisfying to use, especially the bowler gun, which is incredibly gratifying to see that cable eject and wrap itself around an enemy's neck, sometimes knocking them unconscious or at least temporarily restraining them, meaning Sam has to plant his big black boot on the back of their heads to knock them out. That's dealing with the human enemies in the game. As I'm sure you've seen, there's a haunting, otherworldly, floating, ghost-like creature that's called a BT that only Sam can see, which is explained in the story, which I'll get onto shortly. We're given anti-BT guns and the bullets are loaded with your own blood, and your blood is your health bar, so why blood? Again, this is explained in the story, but as you'd expect, you have to be cautious with your ammo because
your body only has a certain amount.
But it's just another example of an amazingly unique concept. This is just a few of the weapons at our disposal. Eventually we'll unlock more permanently neutralizing solutions, and my favourite, the sticky gun, which is basically Spider-Man in a gun, giving some creative variety to the way Sam can retrieve his parcels. The character design is visually impressive and hugely diverse, with so much creativity being poured into their designs, from Die Hardman's black skull mask, Higgs's all-black attire with a golden mask, Fragile slightly sexual spiky shoulders with her fancy arse umbrella that looks about as useful as a marzipan dildo, and of course Sam the Man carrying his infamous BB and his handy little robotic BT detecting arm peering over his shoulder. They all look incredible, but from a performance point of view, none of them really stood out as much as I'd hoped they would. Troy Baker, who plays Higgs, is often considered the best of the best for gaming character performances, and he didn't really hit the heights compared to some of his past performances, such as the Joker in the Batman series. Most characters felt a little flat and monotone, but as for Mads Mikkelsen, he stole the show with his initially up-close and personal performance from Clifford Unger, before we eventually witness him evolve into something that's disturbing, to say the least. Oh, and Conan O'Brien, who reels off some absolutely gut-bustingly hilarious otter jokes and even gives you an otter hat. We got in touch with Mr. Kojima himself and asked why did he choose to include this masterstroke combination of otters and Conan O'Brien. It must have cost you a few quid.
Far and away the most expensive shot of the movie, but it was integral to the story.
The game is set in an apocalyptic USA where a catastrophic event known as the Death Stranding has given these otherworldly things, known as beached things, aka BTs, access to our world. These invisible beings have escaped into our world from the beach. In a nutshell, a beach is almost like a pit stop area to the afterlife that's considered to be unique to each person. Without spoiling too much more about the story, Sam has this special ability called Dooms, giving him a rare ability to see and avoid these BTs, which cause explosions known as void-outs when they consume the dead by necrosis. This then produces rain, known as timefall, that rapidly ages and deteriorates whatever it touches. This has led its remaining population to confine themselves to remote outposts known as knot cities, and it's up to Sam to reconnect these knots while uncovering mystery after mystery, learning more and more about the Death Stranding. We're immediately shown the byproducts of this new world, being introduced to this chubby little floating bug thing called cryobites that are to be eaten for a reason I'm deciding not to spoil, but watching the character Fragile peer pressure Sam into eating these fugly things was like...
Good, huh?
So good.
It's a mind-boggling story that has created such a unique world that evokes so much wonder and curiosity. You can sense Kojima's desire to implement a movie nature into the gaming world, but I'm all for this, and I think the two can be combined if done properly. The emotion at times is gut-wrenching. I'm trying to avoid spoilers, but there's many delivery orders throughout that have an emotional human tag associated with them, and one in particular towards the end of the game that involved Sam's bridge baby, the BB that he carries on his chest. My son was barely 1 year old at this point, and any parent who plays that particular moment would find it near fucking impossible not to feel like they've been booted in the stomach. It's a moment I will never forget. It's up there with Arthur's final moments in Red Dead Redemption for sure. The music played such a huge role in the emotion it sapped from me, and not just in that moment either. The soundtrack is mostly filled by a band called Low Raw, as well as a few other quality tracks. I've actually got a few of their tracks downloaded and enjoy listening to them on long drives, remembering certain moments throughout Death Stranding. It's that good. It lives on, long after you've finished playing. Certain moments when huge sprawling landscapes expose themselves to Sam, providing a view that's nothing nothing short of jaw-dropping. Unbelievably, Kojima actually heard a song by Low Raw while shopping in Iceland. No, that's not the Iceland I meant. That's the supermarket over here in the UK. I meant the country. I've mentioned already that the gameplay can be simplified down to a quest-fetching, parcel delivery, walking simulator, and I can even understand those accusations from gamers who crave more action in their games, but for me, the slog of the journey from picking up the parcel's instructions to delivering it to its destination was such an awe-inspiring trek across one of the most visually impressive backdrops I've ever played in a game. It might just be me, but it's one of those games where I rarely just looked ahead. The stunning environment demanded my attention no matter which way I was heading. Again, this can just be simplified down to, oh, this is just a load of mountains and rocks, but those rocks are the journey. Sam's robotic arm detects differences in the terrain through a colour-coded system that, with red obviously highlighting the best chance of Sam losing his footing. I loved navigating this world, looking 3 or 4 steps ahead, looking for a shallow area in a river to wade through or a little gap in a wall of rock to slip through. Early on, abiding by the rules of the terrain is imperative in making it from A to B. Focusing on the polarizing nature of Death Stranding still, I can understand why this might put some people off. Players like to do what they're not meant to do, climbing up the impossible cliff faces of Skyrim with a nice combo of side to side and mashing the jump button just to take that shortcut over the mountain, rather than go round it when I obviously spent 3 times longer mashing the jump button than it would have been for me to have just walked round the fucking thing. I think the same logic is wanted by gamers in Death Stranding, and there are cases to be made that you can do the equivalent of a Skyrim jump button mashing, taking the vehicles around all sorts of impossibly bad terrain. Some of the terrain should have players not even contemplating the idea of showing the rubber face of one of your tyres to that treacherous sea of rock, but they do, and that's just because they're idiots. I myself am one of those idiots after numerous times I've given 0 shits about Sam's poor testicles getting absolutely battered to bits against the seat of his bike when aggressively smashing my way through the disgustingly jagged and bumpy surfaces. To some, that's just part of the fun, and it's almost a freedom to play the game how it's meant to be played, or just cram in as many square pegs in round holes as possible. But if you choose to play the game this way and then complain that the game is clunky, well, that just makes no sense. Norman Reedus portrays a brilliant sense of loneliness throughout, and you will play the game alone, but connecting people is at the forefront of Kojima's thinking, and if there's a stereotypical moral of the story, that would be it. Even though Sam ventures the world alone, there's a constant presence of other players that you'll never actually see. The wide variety of tools and structures available in the game can all be left behind and constructed by other players that are randomly generated in your game for you to use, if needed or wanted. Making sure your battery in your vehicle is fully charged for each journey is critical, and searching for some well-placed generators can be a lifesaver, well, a parcel saver at the least. Poor planning can result in some infuriating moments where you're so close yet so far.
How the juice.
But you can't blame the game for your poor planning. You can blame the game because you've got to plan though, but again, that's just another example of what we want from games and being a division of opinions. Each tool or structure can be liked by other players, which I guess would increase the chances of it appearing in more players' games. We're notified when our tools or structures are used by other players too, and just as you'd guess, there's a gratifying warmth of validation from the likes we receive from other players for leaving well-placed equipment. Even from the NPCs at the distribution centres just felt so validating. Speaking of likes, if you're enjoying the video, give it a like and a cheeky sub while you're here. I need some validation. Cheers. The structures start off as roads and eventually lead to electric ziplining your way across snowy mountaintops, and reshaping the world has such a huge role to play. You can skip over this aspect and Skyrim button bash your way through the game, but these structures once built are so satisfying to know yours and the other player's graft has shaped the world this way, and it just makes it that much simpler to get to your destination too. Being a solo player myself, I was initially concerned about other players interfering with my world, but there was only the odd occasion where a major structure like a road had been built for me, and that was such a welcome surprise. It's a fantastic balance of feeling the presence of other player interaction with the open world, but never negating my use entirely, leaving me with a good sense of worth, with me being the player who more often than not put those finishing touches on the structures to finally see them through to their completion. These structures are built with the variety of materials that can be found out in the world or claimed at the various outposts, but be careful not to rinse them dry just for the structures, because these materials are used to construct vehicles, weapons and other helpful gadgets to help Sam on his way. I know there are plenty of antisocial gamers out there like myself who want to experience things for themselves, but the intrusion of other players is kept to such a pleasant minimum, while Kojima so cleverly reminding us that no man is an island. I was brought up to believe that if you want something doing right, you do it yourself. Over the years I've learned that's not always true, because we all need help from time to time, and I think that's another one of the many messages Kojima is pushing through Death Stranding. The world is littered with various parcels left intentionally or even accidentally by other players and even other porters. Porters are the NPC carriers of cargo, and you can actually stumble across these guys and interact with them. These are the good guys. There are porters out there who eventually lose their minds though, and they've become engulfed with an addiction to hoarding cargo, and those are the first human enemies Sam comes across. They aren't out to hurt you, they just want your cargo. Now if I was living in this world, I'd defo be one of those guys, because it's such an inexplicably addictive process to schlep cargo across this world. It's the same feeling that can be found in most games that have pickups in them. If you're like me and you can't resist wandering a map looking for collectibles and pickups just to wipe the map clean, then you'll be right in your element here. It's just like Gandalf said, not all who wander are lost. That's some deep shit right there. All the footage you've seen so far has been captured on PC at 1440p at the highest settings on a 2080 Super, and never dropping below 70 FPS. It runs so well, it's been such a good port from PS4. I'm convinced, or at least hoping, that if you're one of the 6 PS5 owners and you've never bothered with Death Stranding before, that you might decide to give it a bash now. A more detailed announcement is expected regarding Death Stranding, the Director's Cut release on PS5 in the coming weeks, but I'd hazard a guess and assume the game's going to run at 60 FPS, at least at 1080p. With this new trailer using a very heavy Metal Gear Solid theme, I'm also wondering if there's any new modes or DLC to be included, because it's taken quite a while to get to this point. So maybe Kojima has been working on something, maybe a counter lawsuit against Konami when they inevitably sue him for using Metal Gear Solid's theme in a Death Stranding game. Who even owns that IP out of Konami and Kojima himself? More importantly, I can't wait to see what controversial and polarizing content Kojima has in offer for us in the upcoming Director's Cut. Speaking of controversial and polarizing, go and check out our latest series of videos we've just started, where me and Les dub over some games with ridiculous and highly offensive language, and if you can show your support for our channel, we're still a baby in YouTube terms I suppose, then it'd really help us get up and running. We'd thoroughly appreciate it. Have a good one. Peace out.